Well, it seems the Canadian Liberals are fed up with the insurrection. Their ongoing insurrection in that country, I think, will be remembered as even more traumatic than January the 6th is for American libs. January 6th was a couple of hours on one day in one city at one building. Of course, it was their sacred temple of democracy. You can't violate the sacred temple. That's sacrilegious. But in Canada, it's an ongoing insurrection across many cities, across many provinces. And libs, who, of course, I assume like in America typically live in cities, are concentrated in cities, are having to bear the brunt of the insurrection. I've even heard some of them calling the truckers the trailer ban, as in the Taliban, which is actually a fitting comparison, since the Taliban were a bunch of country boys who, generally speaking, wanted to be left alone by the rest of the world, who Washington kept, antagonizing and sticking, and poking their nose in their face. Of course, the difference here being that the Taliban waged an actual insurrection, and didn't just, park their trucks downtown and say, we're not moving. There's typically considered to be a line separating civil disobedience from armed insurrection. Although I guess as long as they don't specify that it's an armed insurrection, they can get away with calling civil disobedience an insurrection. They're calling it a siege. The city is under siege. Maybe you don't understand how a siege works. A siege is when you have an outside force like blockading your city and trying to starve you out while launching, catapults or cannons at the walls of your city, trying to break in. It's not when people drive in and turn their cars off and their trucks off and their tractors off and they just sit there in the middle of the road. That's not how a siege works. But it's pretty funny to watch. Canadians are pretty buttoned up people to begin with. So it's funny to see Canadian libs with their hair on fire getting almost as hysterical as American libs, though not coming close yet. But they're getting there. They're moving in that direction, and I just love to see it. They're mad about traffic. That's the worst thing in the world to these people who live in big cities, is you're making it tough for me to drive down the street. It takes me a few minutes to navigate around, and there's no police directing traffic. These are the great war crimes of the insurrectionists that the libs of Canada want to be punished. I mean, there's just absolutely zero empathy. There's zero reflection on, what's been done to these people, why they are doing this, how minor of an inconvenience they are to your life for a few days. It doesn't even make them consider, hey, what have I done to these people for the past 2 years? What am I doing to these people right now? There's no connection between hey, maybe these people are blocking traffic because they're mad that they're not allowed to go to Walmart, and maybe I should reconsider that. Now that my day is being inconvenienced, for a week, maybe that would help. Maybe I should think about how they feel when I do things to them. There's none of that at all. There's none of it. There's zero humanity being demonstrated by anyone so far, on the other side of this issue. Viva, to his credit, went and interviewed some counter-protesters in Ottawa yesterday. They were protesting at City Hall, saying that essentially the police are very happy to persecute non-white folks, but they won't crack open some skulls when there is a trucker insurrection going on. And the sentiment generally was, well, everybody has a right not to get vaccinated, but you don't have a right to participate in civil society if you do. I mean, everyone has to stop at red lights. And all of them had the exact same example. They all brought up rules of the road and red lights and stop signs. that's as deep as they could get. There was nothing more there. Like, you think about it. There are millions of people on that side of the issue, in that country and across the world, and that's as deep as they go. Well, the government says I have to stop at a red light. You know what? You're going to start blowing through stop signs because your freedom's being infringed upon. You crazy radical right winger. It's remarkable to see that people like this actually exist. Now, with that said, there finally is a politician in Canada who's trying to tap into this energy and capitalize on it. And it is an MP from the Conservative Party. I have had to look up how to say his name multiple times, and I'm still probably going to screw it up. It's Pierre Poilievre, or Poilievre. I can't remember, because it's not pronounced, of course, how it's spelled. There are certain letters that are silent that are silent in like one part of the word, and then they're not silent in another part. You know, it's a lot of O's and I's and L's. But anyway, I'll just call him Pierre. He put out a 3-minute video announcing, I'm running for Prime Minister of Canada, which you don't really run for Prime Minister of Canada. You have to run for the leader, to be the leader of one of the political parties, and then you, as your political party, run and try and become the biggest party in the country, and then get picked to be, or I guess you just assume the throne. And so really he's running to be the leader of the Conservative Party, but the way that he stylized the ad was running to be the next prime minister, because obviously he wants to unseat Trudeau, who sadly it's going to be quite a few years, and this energy will probably be dead by then, because Trudeau just called an election last year, and he didn't really lose any seats from what I recall. It was it was pretty disappointing. I mean, I guess it was disappointing for Trudeau too, because he was hoping to gain a bunch of seats, which he didn't. But sadly, they don't have elections as regularly in Canada, or in, I guess, a lot of these parliamentary countries as we do here in the United States, where, like clockwork, we have an election every 2 years. We don't always elect a president. We only elect a president every 4 years. But a good chunk of the politicians have to be reelected every 2 years. And in fact, if you're in the House, you yourself have to be reelected every 2 years. If you're in the Senate, it's every 6 years. But we have all these elections staggered so that different people are up for reelection at different times. But always there are people up for reelection every 2 years. And so people in this country can generally make our voices heard pretty often. We have that snap every 2 years. The House is going to reflect the general sentiment generally of which way politically the national environment is moving. And obviously, I'm not an advocate of democracy or anything, so I don't think this works perfect, but I'm saying it works better than a system where I think it's like every 5 years they have parliamentary elections in Canada. And I think that what Trudeau did was, as Prime Minister, you can choose to call an election early, which people, they call snap elections or early elections when they think that they are poised to benefit. So they're used to benefit the party in power, never the parties out of power. And so when you're out of power, having irregular elections is not a great benefit. It makes it hard to get rid of the entrenched party. But setting that aside, this Pier Guy, he's saying a lot of the right things. He seems to understand asset bubbles. I guess he has a net worth of $10 million or something, which would not put him, in the highest class of American politicians, but maybe politicians in Canada. There's less opportunity for corruption, so maybe they can't gain as much. But I mean, just for comparison, I wouldn't be shocked if my local congressman had a net worth of $10 million. That's just kind of, if you're in Congress in America, you've got a lot of bribe money or de facto bribes that you can extract. But, my point is in saying net worth of 10 million, yeah, the guy's rich, but he's not in that top tier of billionaire status. He's not somebody who I would think would be invited to Davos. Maybe he has been. I don't know. I'd have to look into that if this guy picks up any real steam. But he understood that we're in an asset bubble. He understood, hey, printing money creates inflation. It inflates asset bubbles, makes billionaires rich, which is exactly, it's the stuff I talk about on this channel all the time. And he said he wants to make, Canadians the freest people in the world. Good goal. He even had a bit in there about guns, about how they target innocent hunters and farmers, and let gangbangers run free. He was paying lip service to the right causes, is all I'm trying to say. I don't know anything about the guy. He could be a total fraud. But I'm not used to Canadian politicians even paying lip service to things that I would consider, by American standards, to be remotely conservative. I mean, last I checked, the Conservative Party of Canada supported a carbon tax, the most anti-human, pro-Davos thing on the planet. And so this guy certainly seems to stand for something that at least it's an actual alternative to Trudeau. Whereas, I remember going back to, what was his name, that Trudeau unseated, Stephen Harper. I was not a big Stephen Harper fan. He just came across as Bush light to me. And Bush, as you know, was not great here. So it would be nice to see Canada join a lot of the other Western nations in having a true alternative voice to I guess you would call it the transnational Western regime, the Davos regime. The cabal of the center-left and the center-right across the Western world, who all share the same goals, who want to continue inflating asset bubbles, who want to limit energy use for the ultra-wealthy, make the rest of us ride bicycles, live in high-rise apartment buildings in densely populated and packed-in cities, consolidate all of agriculture so that a couple of corporate conglomerates control all the farmland, and so that you don't have small independent farmers and real people out there in the countryside. Pack all the people into the cities, have self-driving tractors grow all the food, and then distribute that in the form of soy-based nutrient shakes. I think that every country needs that. Their opposition needs to be focused on opposing that vision and those people. And if you don't understand that that is like the other side right now, whatever side you're on, left, right wise, it's between normal people and those freaks. And so I don't care if the opposition in a country, the true opposition to the party of Davos, comes from the left or the right. Like in Bolivia, for example, the opposition to this stuff comes from the left, from what I understand. Bolivia is going to be a very important country if we get rid of fossil fuels because of their massive lithium deposits. They're one of the few countries in the world that have, lithium and I believe other rare earths that are essential in making these incredibly inefficient batteries that I talk about. And so the West has been wanting to capture those resources for themselves to balance against China, which has those resources needed for the electric economy domestically. I believe also Peru is another one where the resistance to this crowd is coming from the left. You tend to find that in Latin America. The anti-establishment people come from the left. But then again, in Brazil, you've got Bolsonaro, who of course comes from the right and is very much hated by this crowd. In America, we have Trump, who is kind of by default on the right, and has galvanized the anti-Davos energy, although he himself, of course, is a very imperfect figure. So what I'm getting at here is that Canada's behind the times in having somebody like Erin O'Toole and Justin Trudeau be, the leaders of the two major parties. They are avatars of the Western center. Trudeau is, of course, just another Obama clone. You have Jacinda down in New Zealand, who's a female Obama or a female Trudeau. Those kinds of leaders really have faded away in the past few years, and there's no need for them these days. The facade has been broken, and people like that need to go away. And so hopefully this Pierre Guy might be able to help move Canada along in that direction and having a legitimate opposition. But like I said, because of the electoral schedule, I believe that's going to be a long way away. And by then, this energy will have likely faded, and all of the lockdown regime will be in the rearview mirror, and everyone will have forgotten about it. But even if that's the case, you need to have a strong political opposition in order to push the current regime in the right direction, in order to put pressure on them and act as a counterbalance. Political parties often are much more effective when they're in the opposition than when they are in the government. I would assert the Republican Party of 2010 to 2016 as a prime example of that. Parties like to pass things, they like to introduce new laws, but when they're in the opposition, if they have a spine, they can be the party of no. They're almost never the party of no when they're in power, but when there's bad guys in power and you have a decent opposition, they will actually fight. And then, of course, hopefully, if they were to have a strong anti-lockdown, pro-freedom national leader, then it would be much harder for conservative leaders in highly conservative areas like Alberta to continue to persecute people this way. I can't see the equivalent would be, actually, scratch that. It's a bad example that I came up with. But either way, my point is that if this Pierre Guy were to become the leader of the National Conservative Party in Canada, the Albertan Conservative Party, whatever they call it, the United Caucus of whatever, they would not be able to get away with what they're doing. And the same might even be true for old Doug Ford in Ontario. This guy is apparently from the Ottawa area. He is from Ontario. If you have a strong anti-lockdown, pro-freedom, anti-Davos to a certain extent, anti-asset bubble leader of the National Party who is from Ontario, it would be hard, I think, for Doug Ford to remain so stringent and so steadfast in his fascist edicts. And of course, all of this is only possible because of the trucker convoy, the Freedom Convoy, because Aaron O'Toole was overthrown as a result of all this. And this Pierre Guy is trying to replace him. So if they're able to accomplish getting rid of one feckless opposition and replacing that with a competent opposition, at the very least, you can 100% thank the Freedom Convoy for that. It's great to see that they're not losing steam. I watched Viva's stream yesterday. Very high energy crowd. Lots of people still coming out. Perhaps more than the weekend before, but there are people coming every weekend or every day who are wanting to just see what everything's all about. And it's much more of an Occupy Wall Street sort of thing. I think in Canada they're all going to try and compare it to January 6th, the terrible insurrection, because that's how these pea-brains work. Oh, well, these right-winger fascists, they're just like those right-winger fascists who wanted to overthrow America. Whereas really, these are ordinary people who see that the regime is exploiting a crisis to enrich the elites and oppress ordinary folks, much in the same way that Occupy Wall Street played out, and they're dug in and they don't want to leave until their demands are met. And unlike Occupy Wall Street, because these people are on the right, they are more coherent. They're more cogent. You can talk to them, and they actually, they know what they want. They can tell you in plain English. They don't beat around the bush. They don't have these, ridiculous Soviet committees and I don't use that word term with a capital S. I mean Soviet with lowercase s. These these worker committees like were formed at the end of World War I to get together and to try and decide as a group, what they wanted, and then Occupy, they couldn't organize themselves. They were a bunch of chickens running around with their heads cut off, whereas the Freedom Convoy is highly unified. And so that's what makes them so dangerous. There's a lot of them, they know what they want, and they're willing to wait for it. So, with all of that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.